and welcome to the Sunday morning service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende. I'm the Reverend Tom Rossiello, the minister of the fellowship, and I'd like to extend a special welcome to today's guest speaker, Charles Fishman, whom Kathy will properly introduce later in the service, and also to any of you who may be joining us for the first time or returning after a time away. It's so good to have you with us this morning. And although we dearly miss our in-person gatherings, the power and the depth, the joys and blessings of beloved community are no less present in our virtual time. In the words of the psalmist, how rare it is, how lovely, this fellowship of those who gather together in true community. Now, we always begin our time together with ritual and song, usually reminding us of our interconnectedness, of the values and principles we hold dear, and in accord with which we try to live our lives. In ancient times, both in indigenous traditions and in the early worship of the three Abrahamic faiths, people would walk to a gathering place, singing chants and songs, and inviting others to come along with them. Particularly in indigenous communities, it was not just calling to each other, but calling to the forces of the natural world that sustain them to be with them in their gathering. They created a circle, a sacred circle, calling the spirits to come from the north and the south and the east and the west. And with gratitude for the blessings they bestow on them, calling the elements of earth and air, fire and water, in all their force and beauty, power and gentleness, to be there too. It's a beautiful tradition expressing oneness and the interconnectedness of all creation. So I now invite you to participate in that practice by joining in singing our gathering hymn, Beloved Earth, Mother Garden, Be Here Now. The words will now appear on your screen. As we do each week at the beginning of our time together, we light a flame in a chalice, the vessel of our community, the flaming chalice, the symbol of our faith tradition. It is a way to indicate that we view this hour each week as a special time, a sacred time, a time when we open our hearts and our minds, a time when we call upon our best selves to meet the challenges of the world. In lighting this flame today, we kindle within ourselves the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of justice. Today, the focus of our service is on water, and I'm looking forward to hearing the information our guest speaker, Mr. Fishman, will provide to help us better understand the issues of adequacy, quality, and fairness that relate to a water crisis that affects our community here in San Miguel and people around the world. We all know that science teaches us that life began in the water, and water is essential to all life, and indeed, we ourselves are made of water. We search far off planets for signs of water and therein signs of life. We know too that water is our universal solvent and our principal cleansing agent. Water not only cleanses and creates and sustains life, but also can destroy, as in floods and sea level rising. But the teachings about water's essential nature and our relationship to water long predate scientific study and knowledge. It's no coincidence that in religions from those of indigenous cultures to all three of the Abrahamic faiths to the religions of the East, water plays a prominent and spiritually significant role in all of them. Water is used for ritual cleaning before a Muslim prays, or in a mikveh cleansing ritual in Judaism. In Christianity, water is used in the rite of initiation, baptism, which some believe is a ritual cleansing of original sin. In our tradition and others like us, water is often used for the purpose of dedicating a child and welcoming them into the world and into the community. At this time of year, many of our congregations perform a service called water communion, where people pour water from sources significant to them into a common bowl, representing how we come together as one community. In everyday rituals, in many traditions, water is essential. Walk into any Catholic church in San Miguel and you find holy water waiting by the door for you to bless yourself. In the scriptures of most traditions, water plays a significant role as well. These scriptures relate to a time when people lived much closer to the natural world and lack of water was indeed a constant threat. The Abrahamic faiths themselves come from an arid geographic location, and wandering the desert seeking actual, as well as what we might call spiritual water, is a guiding force in their stories. On the other hand, many of them also have a story of an ancient flood, Noah's flood in Judaism and Christianity, and a closely related Babylonian story of Gilgamesh, and the great flood of Manu in Hindu tradition. All represent water as revered and powerful force in shaping and reshaping the earth. And water is often a metaphor for spiritual truth. Interestingly, in Islam, the word Sharia, which we often think of with negative connotations, actually means the path to water. And Jesus in Christian scripture is described as the living water. In Christians' most sacred week of the year, humility is shown by the washing of feet, and the Paschal candle is dipped in water before it is lit to symbolize the light of Christ. In many traditions, wells, sources of water, and rivers are considered sacred sites, probably in no tradition more prominently than in Hinduism, with its profound reverence for the Ganges River, whose sacred water is said to flow from the very toe of the god Vishnu. And even within these scriptures from ancient times, there are descriptions of polluted waters and land, as well as scriptural admonishments against doing so. There is the welcome of the rain, the protection of the spring, and the sharing of its water. These faith traditions all recognize the important role of water in our lives and in the lives of our planet. To use water in spiritual practices and rituals, to refer to and declare sacred sources of water and rivers, to emphasize our relationship to water as one of spiritual kinship, to embrace a religious kind of respect for the sustaining and cleansing properties of water, to understand water as a blessing for all which requires our care to maintain and can provide an added, and in some cultures, a primary warrant for actions relating to water conservation, quality, and access. And now we go to Bonnie for news of our community and an update from the COVID task force.
Good morning, everyone. If you're joining us for the first time today and you'd like to learn more about our fellowship, please contact Chris Chase at the email in the chat box or send her a private chat now. If you're considering making this fellowship your spiritual home, there is information about membership on our website, UUFSMA.org. We invite you to join one of our discussion groups on Zoom. You can read about them in the order of service, and for more information, contact Deanna Amaya at the email in the chat box. The Sunday Service Committee welcomes your feedback on this service, and if you have thoughts to share, please contact Kathy Canepa at the email in the chat box. The Fellowship has started preparations for our Day of the Dead altar, which will be virtual this year. You'll be able to visit it online before, during, and after our November 1st Sunday service. We hope you will share your photos of family or friends you wish to remember, those you would honor if you were making an altar in your home. And if you have images of UUFSMA members and friends from past decades, please place them on this altar also. Start hunting for your photos now. The project of assembling the photos will take some time, so the deadline for submitting them will be October 10th. Details about labeling and sending them in will be available very soon. For today, our speaker, Charles Fishman, has graciously agreed to stay for a question and answer period after the service. So we will not have small breakout groups today, and instead we encourage everyone to stay connected for about 15 minutes of Q&A. Please jot your questions down during the talk and then put them in the chat box right after the service so Charles can address them. After the Q&A session, you can stay connected for chatting and socializing. And now, a few thoughts from our fellowship's COVID-19 task force, the group of doctors, nurses, social workers, and care team members with expertise relevant to the current pandemic. Forgive us if we sound like a broken record, but the rates of COVID infection in San Miguel and in this state are still increasing, and more expats are getting infected now too. This increases our risk of being exposed to COVID anytime we leave the house. We can catch this virus from people who have no symptoms, who have no idea they are infected. That could be me or you. We urge you to continue all your mask, distance, and hand washing precautions and limit your activities and contacts outside your home as much as possible. We know some of you are doing a great job protecting yourselves and others carefully. Others are getting tired of this, more casual, choosing to take some added risks. Restaurants, dinner on the patio with a few friends, even outdoors, you take your mask off to eat, so you add to the risk level for everyone present. Now, let's talk a little about the approaching flu season. Influenza is a different virus, but it also spreads through droplets and aerosols, so the same precautions we are taking for COVID-19 will be helpful in reducing the spread of influenza. Flu vaccines for this year will be available soon, and all medical societies recommend strongly that you get vaccinated. These vaccines are safe. They cannot give you the flu. At worst, a sore arm. Flu vaccines are usually about 50% effective in preventing the flu or making an infection milder. This year, the CDC is recommending that you get your flu shot as early as you can. Here in San Miguel, that will probably be early November. Free flu shots will be available for everyone at the public clinic in La Lejona. Private doctors and clinics will charge you, and it could be as much as 1,200 pesos. Up north, we know there is a high-dose vaccine made especially for folks over 65, but it is very difficult for doctors to obtain it here in Mexico. If it's not available here, the standard dose is still much better than nothing. We'll put more details about flu shots in the newsletter each week. A suggestion: if you plan to go to a private doc or clinic, call them right away to make an appointment so they count you in the number of doses of vaccine that they order. Will there be a COVID vaccine anytime soon? Don't hold your breath. Even if the safety and effectiveness tests are finished soon, there are big problems with distributing and actually giving the vaccine to everyone. So these problems have to be solved first. It's likely that any new vaccine for COVID will need 2 shots, will need to be repeated every year, and will only be about 50% effective, just like the flu vaccine. So don't imagine you can put away your masks anytime soon. Sorry. Please, let's take good care of each other by staying as safe as possible. Thank you.
Please join Kathy and I in reciting our spoken covenant, which should appear on your screen. We respect the interdependent web of life and work for a just and peaceful world. We encourage the search for truth and meaning, strive for compassion in our relationships, and seek values that will benefit our lives and the lives of others. This is our covenant.
Respetamos todos los estilos de vida dentro de su red interdependiente y trabajamos por un mundo justo y pacífico. Alentamos la búsqueda de la verdad y la comprensión total. Nos esforzamos por mantener compasión en nuestras relaciones y buscamos valores que beneficien nuestras vidas y las vidas de los demás. Este es nuestro convenio. And now we go to Tom.
We now enter into a very sacred time in our service, a time when members and friends share significant joys, sorrows, and concerns with their community. If you have a joy, sorrow, and concern that you would like me to share in a future service, please email it to me. And if you have something you need to share this morning, you may type it into the chat column now. As more schools and colleges return to in-person classes, several of you wish to share your concern for students and teachers, many of them your family members. This is a candle for their safety and well-being, and also a candle for their quality education, be it virtual or in classrooms. By way of Cynthia Klaus and Dan Neuspiel, we're lighting this candle in support of Gary and Cher Davidson. They have several family members whose home in Oregon is in the area of the fire, and they've been evacuated. Earlier in the week, they reported that the fire was only a quarter of a mile from their daughter's home. But now the winds have died down a bit, and it looks like they may be getting the fire under control in that immediate area. Gary and Cher are putting a couple of those families and pets in their 2-bedroom condo in Portland and report that their location is safe about 30 miles from the fire. They ask for your good thoughts that all their families' homes and the homes of others as well as, of course, lives, be spared. In a similar vein, Linda Soren lights the next candle, sending prayers to all those affected by the wildfires in the West and the heroic firefighters from all over, including a brigade from Guanajuato that's trying to stop them. She asks for special thoughts for her daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren and relatives in Portland, Oregon, which at the moment has the worst quality of air in the world. Also, Nora Cohen has asked us that we remember all those affected by fires on the West Coast, and this candle burns for all of them. This candle is from Michael Hertz. Michael was broken into in his home in San Miguel on Friday night and had a bunch of electronic equipment, monitors, cell phones stolen. He was asleep at home and the cell phone was beside him, sleeping in his bed. But luckily he did not awake and he was not injured in any way. But our thoughts and concerns go out to Michael in this difficult situation. Of course, once again this week, we light a candle of sorrow for those lives lost to COVID and of support for those who have fallen ill with the disease. This candle is for all of us who are suffering from the fatigue of isolation and restriction. But it is a candle of joy that our community has done well in staying safe. And also, it is above all a candle of encouragement, strength, and fortitude to continue to do so, especially as the rates of infections rise. This is a candle of joy, a joy that many of you spoke of this week, and that is for the blessings of virtual community and the support and caring of friends, and the face-to-face connections that we experience by way of our computer screens. We light a final candle for all those joys, sorrows, and concerns that you've typed into the chat, and any that are held deep in your hearts but remain unspoken this morning. With hearts open to one another and seeking our own spiritual nourishment, we now enter into a time of meditation, guided by the beautiful music of flowing waters.
Good morning. This fellowship supports worthy NGOs who serve our local San Miguel community, and today I'll highlight one of these, Jóvenes Adelante. Over the past decade, access to and completion of higher education has improved substantially, and Jóvenes Adelante has been at the forefront of that improvement locally. Jóvenes Adelante, or JA, provides access to higher education for the best 25 to 30 SMA students every year, and currently has 115 students in process. The path to a university degree is far from smooth or simple in a chronically undereducated populace. The overall graduation rate nationwide is 25%. For Jóvenes students, that number is close to 85%, and that's remarkable. So how does JA achieve these results? They are with the student and indirectly with families every step of the way. They invest in students for the long haul and for the big picture, a Mexico that offers increasing opportunity for upward mobility and lasting community level change. Now, over their 20-year history, Jóvenes Adelante's support structure has evolved to include a premium scholarship, further financial assistance when needed, laptops, mentors and psychological counseling, extra academic student development and leadership workshops, and travel opportunities. And in addition, for the first time ever, they have initiated a pilot program to adapt their support to high school seniors. The result is the most robust, comprehensive higher education support program in Mexico. This UU Fellowship proudly sponsors 4 students through the course of their university studies. And this year, we will have 4 new students who we look forward to getting to know. If you value supporting organizations like Jóvenes Adelante, and if you enjoy these services, please know that they are not fully paid for by our membership pledges alone. We also rely on your weekly donations to help us in the work we do. So we will pause here to let you connect to our donation link, which you will find in the chat box, or you can do so after the service. But why try to remember when you can take a minute right now and go to our website, UUFSMA.org, or click on the link in the chat box. You can use PayPal or credit or debit cards. You can donate to our minister's discretionary fund, or you can leave a general donation to meet our ongoing expenses. For other ways to donate, please contact our president, Dan Newspiel, in the chat box or by email. We'll return to the service with music in 2 minutes, and thank you so much for your generosity.
There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more fires burning, they will find their way to me. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know.
Dayadum, Dayadum, Dayadum,
mountains fall in the side road. The side road. There are more mountains fall in the side road. There are more mountains falling. They will find their way to me. There are more mountains falling the side road. The side road. There are more mountains falling the side road. I will wade through the waters. This I know. This I know. I will wade through the waters. This I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. We will wade through the waters. This I know. This I know. We will wade through the waters. This I know.
I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know. I will walk through the fire when they find their way to me. I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know.
I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains when they find their way to me. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know.
Now, it's my privilege to introduce our guest speaker for today, Charles Fishman. A former reporter for the Washington Post, Charles Fishman has become one of the most challenging and inspiring public voices on water issues today. His book, The Big Thirst: The Secret Life and Turbulent Future of Water, is the best-selling book on water in a generation. It is changing how people think about water and how they manage it. Charles grew up in Miami, Florida, graduated from Harvard, and after a while living in Mexico City, is now settled in Washington, D.C., where he lives with his wife, also a journalist, and his 2 children. I want to remind you that he has kindly agreed to remain with us for questions and answers following the service, so just stay connected. And now, please welcome Charles Fishman.
Well, good morning. You all may be used to this Sunday morning ritual. I am not, and what a spectacular way of spending an hour with you all. That has just been delightful. Everything you would hope a Sunday morning service would be. Joyful, reflective, causing us to think about both our blessings and our challenges. So thank you for inviting me to participate in today's service and for welcoming me into your fellowship. I have had a great time the last couple of months learning a little bit about San Miguel de Allende. I want to thank Michael Hertz for somehow finding me and wooing me into being with you all this morning. And also a special thanks to Dylan Terrell from an organization many of you may know, Caminos de Agua, which works on water problems. And Dylan was kind enough to really tutor me a little bit in what's going on. We don't often think about water at all, in fact, but we particularly don't think about one of the things that water does for us, which is that it connects us to each other. It connects us in place. That's why when you go to the beach, when you go to the lakefront, when you go to a riverfront park, there's all these other people there. It connects us, as Reverend Tom made so clear this morning, through ritual, not just to the people in our community or to the people who are our same faith around the world, but these rituals, the Jewish ritual of the mikvah, the Christian rituals of baptism go back thousands of years. So it connects us not just through ritual, but through time as well. And that's one of the things I've loved about water. And I took special care in my book, not just to write about pipes and pumps and treatment plants and diseases, but about our emotional connection to water as well. So I'm not a geologist. I am not a hydrologist. I am not a scientist or an engineer. I am just a journalist. I spent 3 years traveling the world with the express intent of trying to understand how people do tackle their water problems or how they fail to tackle them and what the consequences in both cases are. So I've been to Fiji to see where that lovely bottled water, Fiji water, comes from. I have been to San Pellegrino to see where San Pellegrino water comes from. I have stood at the bottom of a wastewater treatment tank the size of an Olympic swimming pool. It was empty, but it had only just been emptied. I have carried water on my head with the women and girls of a village in India called Jargali, 3 kilometers out to the well, 3 kilometers back with the water grinding into the top of your head. After 45 minutes, I carried enough water to flush a US toilet once, and I wasn't that good at it because I spilled most of it down the front of my shirt. I spent a month in India, in fact, trying to understand how Indians cope with water and fail to cope with water. I also spent a month in Australia in the middle of a decade-long drought that really reshaped the economy and the politics of that country completely. And I spent a month in Las Vegas trying to understand how that city even exists. And in some ways, everything I learned in that round-the-world trip can be summed up in a simple, almost silly water story. If it rains hard and you look up during the rainstorm and the ceiling of your living room has a damp spot on it, the proper response, the useful response, is never, honey, the roof looks like it's leaking. Let's wait a couple months and see if it takes care of itself. It won't. It will only get worse. There are 3 basic ideas that little tiny story encapsulates about almost all water problems in the world. First, water problems almost never get better on their own. Whether you're talking about a leak in the roof of your own house or you're talking about arsenic and fluoride in the drinking water of 600,000 people. Water problems don't fix themselves. Second point is, as with the leak in the roof, we know how to solve essentially every water problem that exists. We do not need a Manhattan Project or an Apollo moonshot project for water. The technical, engineering, chemistry solutions for water problems are well known. There are 27 water problems in the world. We know how to fix them all. We could use better solutions to some of them, cheaper solutions, quicker solutions. There are no unsolved water problems in the world. So what that means is that water and the technical issues around water is almost never the problem. The people are the problem. The hard part when you're solving water problems is the human part. That doesn't make them easier to solve. In fact, it sometimes makes them harder to solve. So water problems don't get better on their own. We know how to solve most problems, and the hard part is the human part. And then, again, as with the leak in the roof, as with what's going on with you all, to fix water problems, you have to see them realistically. You have to put aside wishful thinking. People often bring wishful thinking directly to bear on water problems. If wishful thinking worked, every drought would end with the first prayer service. No drought, unfortunately, has ever been ended by a prayer service. You have to put the wishful thinking aside because not only doesn't it help, wishful thinking often gets in the way of doing what's actually necessary to tackle the problem. In the region that includes San Miguel de Allende, you all do have serious water problems. The aquifer that lots of people rely on is overused. It is, to use the term that water people used, overdrawn. They use exactly the same term that the bankers use. And it's overdrawn in a dramatic, almost unimaginable way. People are using 30% more water from the aquifer than goes back into the aquifer every year. That's astonishing. That's why it's falling so quickly. And the water from the aquifer, it isn't sufficient, but it's also contaminated with two really dangerous chemicals, as you all probably know, arsenic and fluoride. Contaminated, in fact, is too mild a word. The water is poisoned with arsenic and fluoride. And problem one, the falling aquifer, makes problem two, the poisoning of the water, worse. As the aquifer falls, for a couple different reasons, the concentration of arsenic and fluoride actually goes up. So my first observation is hardly original. You hardly need me to tell you, but no child should be poisoned by having a glass of water or brushing her teeth before going to bed. No mother or father should be in a position of having to hand their child a glass of water that is poisoned. That's obvious, but in the region you all live in, that happens every day for thousands of children and thousands of mothers and fathers. That water does immediate damage to those children and also to their parents. And I think there should be a real sense of urgency about tackling that problem. The problem of the falling aquifer is a much more complicated and in some ways a bigger problem. Today, people in your area who drill water wells often have to go down 3,000 meters to find water. That is nearly 2 miles deep. That's remarkable. The scarcity issue, that falling aquifer, that's a problem that has taken decades to develop, really decades to create. It's a human-created problem. And a problem that took decades to develop can't be fixed next week or next month or next year, even if you had all the power and authority you could possibly want. That problem can't be fixed in a month or a year. Water problems are all solvable: the leak in the roof, the arsenic and fluoride in the water, the disappearing aquifer. But principle 4, the sooner you tackle water problems, the better. Almost always, a problem that is tackled sooner is easier to fix, quicker to fix, and cheaper to fix. That's true of the leak in your house. It's true of the chemicals tainting the water in the San Miguel de Allende region, and it's also true of the aquifer itself. The United States, those problems, of course, are not limited to a place like central Mexico. The US has this vast aquifer called the Aglala. It is one of the fastest falling aquifers in the world. Same thing, overpumped, overused, far more taken out than gets put back. And of course, the story of Flint, Michigan is a story of putting things in water that shouldn't be there and then letting people drink it. One of the key elements in tackling water problems is something a little odd that you need to get comfortable with if you're going to be useful and successful. And that is, water problems require a combination of urgency and also patience, a combination of urgency and patient determination. Urgency for problems like the chemicals in the water. I would ask you all as a community, if we were going to set up a system that enabled every child in the region to drink water that wasn't poisoned, what would that look like? What would it take? If we wanted that system in place a week from now, or a month from now, or a year from now, what would be required so that a year from now, you knew that every child had safe water to drink and their parents also had safe water? You'd need to move with urgency. And that solution might be temporary, while in the background people said, okay, those folks are safe for now, but this isn't a sustainable solution. Let's get a sustainable solution. Other problems, other water problems, require a dozen different solutions all implemented at the same time. In fact, it's a little like the pandemic. There's not one thing that's going to solve the scarcity problem and the dropping aquifer in San Miguel de Allende, just like there's not one thing that's going to help us tackle the pandemic or keep us safe from the pandemic. People need to grow the crops they're growing now differently. They need to grow different crops. The water that falls across the region, and I've heard a lot about whether the rainfall is shifting, is lessening, is coming less frequently, but in greater bursts when it does come. Regardless, the water that does fall needs to make it into the aquifer. And right now, 90% of it doesn't. There's lots of progress to be made there. You all need rainwater harvesting. You need rain gardens. You need habitat restoration. You need the removal of the hard-packed ground and concrete that Mexicans are so beloved of, and to turn parks into sort of green swards and places with lawns that recharge the aquifer. You need better regulation and oversight of who's using the water, how the water is being used, what happens after it's used. You need better education of the farmers who are using the water a little heedlessly, better education of the companies, many of them US companies, buying what the farmers produce, so those people understand the damage that the agricultural techniques do. Better education among the community members, better education especially among kids coming up, so they push to create a different world that is more sustainable when they're adults. You need fresh ideas, community management of wells and the aquifer, region by region, something that's been quite successful in the US, where you pool people together and say, instead of competing for the water, let's compete to grow as much as we can while using as little water as we can as a group. Overall, you need a different attitude about the importance of the aquifer and the sustainability of the aquifer, and a sense of stewardship of it, and a different attitude about simply drilling deeper and pumping harder. Now, that is a completely ridiculous list of things that need to be solved. Each one of those things is a huge, complicated undertaking, and weaving them together is, as Dylan Terrell said to me, several lifetimes of work. But you have to start. You have to get a little bit better on the management of the aquifer, 5% better this year, or you'll never make any progress. In fact, all of the problems in the region are worse today than they were 10 years ago. For folks from the US, in fact, it's a little bit of a weird analogy, but it really works. And the comparison is retirement savings. If you start saving for retirement when you're a young person, 25, 26, 27, and you save just 5% or 7% of your income a year, you don't even notice that coming out of your paycheck. And by the time you're 67, there is more than enough money to retire. If you don't save any of that money, and at 57, you look around and say, uh-oh, I'm going to retire soon, I better start saving. Even if you could somehow save every dollar you earned between 57 and 67, you couldn't possibly save enough to stop working 10 years later. This is exactly the same. You cannot solve these big, complicated water problems by a year from now or 2 years from now, but if you don't start, you will never solve them. And if you can make things 5% better this year, and 4% better next year, and 6% better the year after that, suddenly in 2024, things look a lot different. And you've begun to create a culture that by 2030 completely changes the way people regard both managing the resource and the water itself. In fact, it's the only way to do it, a little bit at a time. You all in the Unitarian Universalist Church have these core principles. Paula was kind enough to send me the list, and I just want to connect with two of them because I think they're really relevant. The first one and the last one speak to exactly what we're talking about today. The first one, you all may know this, the first one, of course, is that we need to respect the inherent dignity and worth of every person. And the seventh one is that we need to, it's been said already today, respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Let me be really clear. Without clean water, there is no dignity or worth for a person or a family or a community. Nothing corrodes your ability to be a contributing member of society like not having access to clean water every day. And of course, I would argue that water is a key element of the web that connects us. It connects us not only to each other, because we need to work together to get water and manage water, but water comes from nature. Water comes from the planet. And so our connection to water is also our connection every day to the natural environment. When I was in India, there was a company named Pentair. Pentair is actually a US company, big water infrastructure company. If in your US community, the water utility is replacing the water pipes, they may well be installing Pentair water pipes. They are a big freshwater pipe company. They also make water treatment facilities, huge water treatment plants for cities, all the way down to they make countertop reverse osmosis units that look a little bit like a coffee maker that can take water of almost any quality from any tap and turn it into clean, safe drinking water. They do a lot of work in India. They're a big Indian company. And one of the things they do in India is supply these reverse osmosis units to places not unlike San Miguel de Allende that have naturally occurring problems with their water and need it cleaned. And they've made a commitment to donate units. They're the size of like a closet that could take care of an entire school or a small village and provide clean water. And when I was in India, I visited their facilities, I visited their factories, and they really wanted me to go to a village outside of Delhi that had one of their water, closet-sized water units that had really made a difference, they thought, in how that community lived. And I was in India for a month. We talked back and forth a fair amount, and finally I had 3 or 4 days left, and I called and said, either I'm going to the village or I'm not going to see it because I'm getting ready to get back on the plane. And they said, well, we have some bad news about that village and that water unit. And I said, okay, what's the news? And they said, well, the reverse osmosis unit for the village worked for about 6 months. This was 3 years downstream. And then for some reason it stopped working. No one thought to get in touch with us. They went back to using the previous supply of water, walking to get it, carrying it on their heads. They stripped the water machine the treatment machine that we had left for parts that they could use for other things. It doesn't exist anymore, and they're not using it. And I thought, well, that's really important. That's a key moment. It's a fifth. I'm keeping track of my principles. It's a fifth principle of tackling water problems, and among the most important, and that is people need a water solution that they understand, that matches their needs and that fits their understanding and their culture. What Pentair, which thinks of itself as an Indian company in India, what they did was give this village a magic water box. They didn't give the village an understanding of how the magic water box worked or education of 2 people in the village to sort of maintain it and sustain it, or even a phone number to call if something went wrong. And 6 months in, the magic water box stopped working. And it may have stopped working only to the degree that it needed to be rebooted, like a Windows computer. But no one in the village understood how the magic water box worked. And so when it stopped working, they just shrugged and went back to getting water the way they knew. And so that was a solution that seemed brilliant and generous, but didn't match the community that whose problem it was trying to help solve. And so it ended up being something that not only in the end didn't work, it sort of increased the cynicism in that village about people coming in and helping with their problems. I think you all have a great opportunity to have an impact on water in your community, and I think that you already are. I went through the list of grants that you all have made this year. 3 of those 13 are directly about water. Another 3 are very clearly having an impact on how people think about water indirectly. But what can you all do? Well, here's my short list, which is presumptuous, of course, because I've never been to your community and I don't know what you're doing. But nonetheless, my short list, you can challenge me in the Q&A afterward. First of all, collect what falls as rain. That's really, really important. In your own home, in rain barrels, in rain gardens, if you build something new, redesign your gardens, participate in the creation of a real estate development, make sure that the water is managed in such a way that it can be used on site, and also that what's left goes back into the aquifer, back into the ground underneath the facility. You can help do the same thing in villages and towns. A key to bringing safe water to the villages across the region is to help those villages collect rainwater and save it, because the rainwater is clean, the rainwater is untainted. Point 2, do what works. Do not reach for the modern, hip, Pentair style technology. Rain barrels work. Rain gardens work. Restoring wetland areas works. None of those things ever need to be rebooted because the technology burped. New technology is great and really, really helpful and can be really important, but start with technology that people can understand, that you all can understand, and that can be rolled out simply and that people can connect with what's going on. Really important management technique that I learned long ago. Don't fight with people who are pulling the other way. Don't fight with people who tell you water's not a problem, this aquifer's not connected to that aquifer, don't worry, it'll be okay. Just do what you think needs to be done. Don't waste energy trying to persuade people who violently disagree that you're right and they need to join you. You all have limited resources personally and as a church. Work with the people who are pulling in the direction you want to go. The progress you make will be far more persuasive than any argument you have with somebody on a Tuesday afternoon where you try and persuade them that you're right. And as part of both doing what works and working with people who are pulling in the same direction, connect with people you might not immediately think of. In a community like San Miguel de Allende that is trying to be modern, hip, advanced, trying to woo in people from around Mexico and also expats from outside the country, there are going to be architects, designers, planners, landscape designers, even people working on the landscaping, all of whom have a huge impact on water use. A smartly designed home, a smartly designed apartment complex, a smartly designed mixed-use development or park, or all of those together, changes the water equation, not for a month or a year, but for a decade or for 3 decades. It changes what happens with water right in that area for many, many years to come. And those people are a receptive audience. They know exactly the impact that smart water management can have. So when you're involved in that, or when you have the opportunity to have contact with those people socially or professionally, ask what they're doing and encourage them to do more. Often, customers who don't know any better will take the lead of professionals, and often professionals just need a nudge. This is what our community needs. Finally, don't reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of people in your community who really care about this work and care about having an impact, and so join forces with them. Often the best question you can ask is, what can I do to help? How can I help you do what you're doing? And I promise you there's more. You all know better than I, there's more than enough work to be done. So the big idea is you have to combine impatience for the urgent problems with patient determination for problems that take a little more attention. No wishful thinking when it comes to water. Water problems do not solve themselves, and wishful thinking gets in the way of the right solution. And make sure the solutions match the community and the culture, and that people whose problem you're helping solve actually understand the solution and can sustain it. I want to finish with a story of my own time in Mexico City. We lived in a lovely neighborhood in Mexico City called Condesa. We moved purposefully into a Mexican neighborhood. We did not live with expats. And for about the first 6 or 8 months that we lived in Mexico, I was sick every single day, stomach pain in the afternoon. Most of the time, it was just sort of a stomach ache, and I thought, there's my stomach ache. A couple times a month, it was so serious that I literally would curl up in a fetal position on my bed for 20 minutes until it went away and I could go back to work. And I just sort of thought of the pain as a tax for living in Mexico. We're living in Mexico. I've got a stomach ache. That's life. There's so many other wonderful things about being here. Oh well. We lived in a row house that was 4 stories tall, and we were connected to the municipal water system in Mexico City. Mexico City's water is not considered safe to drink as it comes out of the tap. It is clean and safe the moment it leaves the water treatment plant, but for complicated reasons, it is actually tainted by raw sewage as it travels through the pipes on the way to your home. So no one drinks the tap water. The wealthy people don't drink it, and the poor people don't drink it. And we had big sort of Culligan man style 5-gallon dispensers in a couple places in the house. And we used that water for everything. We not only drank it and brushed our teeth with it and cooked with it, but things like washing tomatoes and washing strawberries. You didn't wash those in tap water, you washed them in bottled water. And in every bathroom, there was a little glass pitcher filled with the Culligan man water from downstairs. And inevitably, in my 3rd story bedroom at 10:30 at night, when it was time to brush my teeth, the little pitcher would be empty. And I just sort of developed the habit of rolling my eyes and thinking, well, I'm just going to brush my teeth with the tap water. And so almost every day, usually twice a day, I would rinse my toothbrush in the tap water, shake it off, brush my teeth, rinse it again with the tap water, shake it off, and put it back in the holder. I didn't rinse my mouth with the tap water, but I didn't think anything of using that water on my toothbrush. It turns out that in our neighborhood, they actually turned the water off all weekend long. There was no tap water pressure from Friday at 7 p.m. to Sunday at 7 p.m. And we knew this, and the house had a huge cistern underneath the garden, and then a smaller tank on top of the water. The municipal water filled the cistern, pumped it up to the tank on top of the roof, and that's where our water pressure came from for flushing toilets and showering and so forth. And unbeknownst to us, we weren't paying attention, the municipal water system announced one weekend that they weren't turning the water back Sunday at 7 p.m. They were going to leave it off until Monday at 7 p.m. And so we didn't know this, we didn't pay attention to it. And so Monday morning, we actually ran out of water. The toilets wouldn't flush, the showers didn't work. There was no water in the house. That was the one morning my kids really needed to shower before they went to school. So we called a water supplier who arrived with a tanker truck filled with potable water. We opened the front door. They ran a fire hose through the living room and the kitchen out onto the garden into the cistern. And I called Sergio Yaridu. Sergio owned the house we were living in. He was living in an apartment a few blocks away. He was a lawyer, and he had raised his family in the house we were living in. And his kids were going to school in Houston, and his wife and kids had moved to Houston. He was going back and forth. And I thought, if I'm calling the water tanker, I should call Sergio. So Sergio comes over, sort of supervises what's going on. And we're looking into the cistern, which was actually made of the kind of blue material you would recognize from backyard swimming pools. And the cistern was empty until they started to fill it. And there was a fair amount of stuff on the bottom of the cistern. And I don't know exactly why, but I turned to Sergio, this tall, elegant, movie star, good-looking lawyer, and I said, Sergio, you raised your family in this house. Did you ever drink the tap water here? Like, I don't know, even for something as simple as brushing your teeth? And he gave me the strangest look, and he said, why in the world would we drink the tap water? He pointed into the cistern. He said, does that look like something you want to be drinking out of? And I never did again brush my teeth with the tap water. Even if I had to go trudging down at 10:30, 3 flights of stairs with the pitcher and back up, I always used clean water on my toothbrush. And about 3 days later, my stomach ache went away and it never came back. And so literally 6 or 8 drops of water a day on my toothbrush had made me sick for 6 or 8 or 9 months. And I haven't showed you my book. I'd already written the book. This is what the clean, nice version looks like. This is what the version that an author carries around with him all the time looks like. So I knew, in all immodesty, I knew everything that an ordinary person could know about water who didn't have a specialized degree or specialized training. And yet here I was ignoring the most basic rule. I was applying wishful thinking to my toothbrush every day and also not making the most basic connection. Why was I sick? I was sick because I was drinking the water I wasn't supposed to be. So that's a reminder to me all the time, and I think a wider reminder to approach these problems with appropriate humility, but also determination and also willingness to sort of take a step back and listen and reassess things and make sure you're doing the most basic things first. All right. I so appreciate being included, and I will stick around, obviously, for your questions and for the rest of the service. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charles, for both an informative and truly inspiring presentation. You know, we particularly appreciate your focusing on our community and the challenges that are here, and also what we can do about them. You've also whetted my appetite, at least, and I'm sure others, to read the book, The Big Thirst, The Secret Life and Turbulent Future of Water, and I plan to do so, and I'm sure others will as well. And now I'd like to invite everyone to join in bringing our service to an end, singing hymn number 74, On the Dusty Earth Drum. The words are actually a poem celebrating rain, written by an early 20th century African-American playwright and poet. His name, Joseph S. Cotter Jr. Cotter was born in the late 1800s, lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and died at the age of 24 of tuberculosis, just as his writing was becoming known. The words will now appear on the screen. Please join in. Let us part with these thoughts. From ancient faiths and modern science, we know that the water that falls on the earth, that flows in the streams, that bubbles up from the ground, is sacred to us. It belongs to all of us. Nothing except the air we breathe is as essential to sustain our lives. And we know, like all gifts that we enjoy, gifts given to us that we did not earn, we need to care for it, protect it, and use it wisely and share it justly. As a faith tradition, we are a justice-seeking people, and these issues of water use and quality and availability are so clearly social justice issues. We are a tradition that recognizes the equal worth and dignity of every individual, and as such we're called to speak out for brothers and sisters around the globe who are denied basic rights. And we're called to show justice, equity, and compassion to our fellow human beings through our words and our deeds. We now will extinguish the flame, but not the light that has come to us in the shared times. This we carry with us as an inspiration to meet the challenges of our days. And may peace be with you till we meet again.
One question that's come in for you. Can you identify any communities without water scarcity? That is, who's doing it right and what we can learn from them?
There are lots of places in the world doing it right. The key is to pick places that look like you all and that so have similar problems. So one of my favorite examples of a place doing it right is in fact Las Vegas. Las Vegas has 2.5 million residents. The amount of water that Las Vegas gets was set back in about 1935, when Las Vegas had just 15,000 inhabitants. So how does Las Vegas survive with a water allotment made when they had 15,000 inhabitants, now that they have 2.5 million, 3 million inhabitants? Las Vegas recycles every single gallon of water that hits a drain anywhere in the entire community. They are, in fact, the most effective at recapturing water and recycling it. 94% of the water that the utility supplies every day is recaptured, cleaned, returned to the lake, and reused. Well, the climate of Las Vegas may have something in common with you guys, but that's not a good solution to your problems. And in fact, the water use, what I was told by Dylan is, if everybody in the city of San Miguel de Allende stopped using water, could somehow miraculously go a year without using water at all, the aquifer would still be overdrawn, because most of the water use that causes that problem is agricultural. And so you need to figure out an incentive system to grapple with that kind of problem. In point of fact, it is a really, really complicated problem to persuade farmers to use their water differently when all of the economic incentives that have been set up are for them to just pump harder. As I said, we actually have exactly the same kind of problem, different consequences because we're a different country here in the US with the Aglala. And so, so there are, that in fact, you've asked exactly the right question. The best way to tackle water problems is to start out by saying, what's our problem? Okay, who else has had a problem like this? And what have they done to solve it? And does what they've done give us some solutions we can use, or are we so different in other ways that that doesn't work? But that is step one, because point one, every water problem has been solved. There are no new water problems. The politics and the human relations issues are what really often slows things down.
Thank you, Charles. I'm back now, and there's one question I'll pass along. If you see one in the chat box, help yourself, Charles. This has really been a wonderfully inspiring talk. One of our members, Cliff Durand, poses this question. Something like 90% of water usage in our area is by commercial agriculture producing for export to the U.S. We are exporting our water to the U.S. so U.S. people can enjoy off-season vegetables. The economic interests in maintaining this are powerful. What can we do to overcome this? And you are muted, Charles.
Cliff, you're asking exactly the right question in some ways, but what I would say is that what a community like you all in particular, expat Americans living in San Miguel de Allende, can do is simply educate yourselves, is understand the dimensions of the problem, the complexity of the problem. I talked to Dylan. He was really generous. I think our conversation lasted 90 minutes or more. And the layers of the agricultural problem are really intense. There are agricultural interests in the U.S. who want this produce. There are producers. There are people used to drawing the water out in San Miguel de Allende area and using it. There are bureaucrats in the Department of Agriculture and water management bureaucrats tugging in different directions. There are management systems, well drilling oversight systems, all kinds of layers of complexity. If the Mexicans decided that they wanted to solve this problem, even for Mexicans in positions of political power, it would be challenging and it would take time, and they would need a very smart strategy that changed the incentives on overusing water. Actually, one of the most powerful ways of changing the equation would be for the US companies to say, we don't want you to do this way anymore. I wrote a book about Walmart before I wrote the water book. It's actually considered the definitive text on how Walmart does what it does. And although Americans today don't like to take this in, Walmart is now, in 2020, probably the most powerful environmentalist in the world. The single force for making the environment better. They move swiftly. They don't need to ask anybody. They have so much power that when they say to Chinese factories, you will do it this way or we will buy it somewhere else, those factories change the way they operate. In the space of 5 years, Walmart doubled the gas mileage of long-haul trucks. Not just their own, everybody's in the world. And they gave their insights away. The gas mileage of long-haul trucks hadn't changed in 40 years. In the space of 5 years, Walmart cut the energy necessary to run a Walmart supercenter by a third. That means every time Walmart opens 3 new ones, the fourth one essentially uses no energy. Now you can say, yeah, but the real solution is no more Walmart. But that's not going to happen. So you want companies of that scale to do the right thing. They live in the world too. Their employees live in the world too. So in some ways, the quickest path to changing what's going on is for the big customers of that produce to say, we want to keep buying it from you, but we want you all to change the way you produce it so that producing it for us doesn't damage you. But there is a lot of complexity in that. And so I would say, although you all think rightly that's the most serious problem, I would say work on the aspects of the problem that are easier to tackle and learn as much as you can about the layers of complexity. It would be like Mexicans moving to Houston and saying, boy, this oil and gas thing y'all got going on here is a mess. Let us clear it up for you. I'm not sure how welcome that would be, even if they were right. So you need to check in at the level where you can be useful and helpful, while also watching what else is going on.
Thank you, Charles. You're saying that Walmart has had a conversion? Wow, I didn't realize that. Want to ask you something about climate change. How does climate change factor into the water problems here and into the points you made? We didn't hear climate change yet come off of your lips this morning.
That's true. Because climate change, of course, makes everything more complicated. And just in talking to Dylan and talking to Michael and talking to you guys the other day, I heard a lot of the rainfall seems like this year and like this last year, and it seems like it's changing. And what I would say about climate change is, look, climate change isn't going to make the problems that the San Miguel de Allende region faces easier. It's going to make them harder. And you don't actually know what the unintended consequences are. Maybe you could imagine a situation in which the total rainfall didn't change, but the time of year it fell changed. That's happening in lots of places. Maybe that would make growing the crops more difficult and unsustainable, and farmers would start doing something else. And so, although climate change was having a negative impact overall, actually the pressure on the aquifer eased up. You simply don't know. And so what I would say is that anything people can do along the lines of what I ticked off is only going to make things better, and that will be true as climate change takes hold. What I wouldn't do is support solutions that will only work if San Miguel de Allende's climate in 30 years looks exactly like it looks today. But building rain gardens, installing rain barrels, restoring wetlands and recharge areas to more natural, to the way they were more naturally, so that what does fall can get back into the aquifer. None of that is going to be a bad strategy. And so, again, it's a little bit like the agricultural use. You have to pay attention to what's going on and make sure you're not doing stuff that's at odds with how the climate is changing. But to be honest, it sounds like there's lots of progress to be made on the basics in the region. And I don't think that kind of progress will be wasted effort, even if the climate changes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to encourage everyone listening that if you do have a question, pose it in the chat. Go ahead and write it in the chat.
And let me just say, some people have said not everybody's American, and I apologize for that. That is absolutely true.
We U.S. expats are always reminded of that by our wonderfully friendly Canadian expats. I'd like to share with everyone a quote that I found in your book, and it struck me, and I'm still scratching my head about it. If I might read a short paragraph. We do not have a water shortage. Every drop of water that's here has seen the inside of a cloud and the inside of a volcano, the inside of a maple leaf, and the inside of a dinosaur kidney, probably many times. What we have here is a profound quandary about what to do with the water we have. Wow.
Who wrote that sentence? That's a good sentence. You know, there was this amazing moment in the course of writing this book. I wrote a story about bottled water for the magazine I worked for then, Fast Company. That's why I got to go to Fiji and to San Pellegrino. And then I decided to write a book about water problems, not bottled water, but the big picture. And I was 6 months into writing that book. And I was talking to a nephrologist, a kidney doctor, about the bizarre topic, what happens when you die of dehydration? Reporters often chase things that seem like they're going to be a good idea that turn out to be a waste of time. And if you're smart, you leave them out of the book. There's nothing in the book about how you die of dehydration. And this particular nephrologist was really boring. And as I was listening to him, I suddenly realized, for some reason, that I had no idea where the water on Earth came from. He was really boring. And I had spent 3 months writing about bottled water, 6 months working on a book that was due in a little more than a year and ended up taking much longer. And I suddenly realized that if I thought about Niagara Falls or I thought about the Pacific Ocean, I had no idea where the water in the Pacific Ocean had come from. How did it get there? We see the water cycle, you know, starting in the second grade. It rains on the mountains, it runs down, we take it, it runs into the ocean, it evaporates, it falls on the mountains. Oh, we can all draw that diagram. Where did it come from in the first place? And I literally excused myself from the nephrologist, and I immediately set to figuring out where water had come from. And I spent the next 2 weeks talking to cosmologists and astronomers. All the water on Earth was formed out in space, one molecule at a time, hydrogens and oxygens finding each other, and then clinging as ice to asteroids and comets. And all that water was delivered as water to the Earth as the Earth was formed and shortly thereafter. There's no real mechanism on Earth geologically for creating new water, and there isn't really a mechanism for destroying water. The water we've got on Earth has all been here essentially forever. It has, in fact, been through the kidneys of the dinosaurs thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And that actually changed how I thought about water. Suddenly learning that the water had all been here forever and that it was born in space and delivered to Earth changed how I thought about the resource itself, but it also changed a little bit how, you look at, I happen to have a glass of water right here, you look at that water and think that water traveled to Earth from space. It gives you a little different sense of it. So you picked what I think of as a particularly appealing passage for this particular group of people.
Okay, well, Charles, we've totally enjoyed our encounter with you. I must say, it's been a pleasure to work with you on this service and a surprising delight. There was nothing dry and boring about your talk.
If you look at the cover of the book, every water book in the history of the world is a dried, cracked lake bread with a dead tree, or a little water spigot with one drop coming out. And I said, I want an optimistic water book cover. So give me 1 minute to say a word about the book that came out since then. I went on from discovering that water came from space, that was my personal discovery, the actual scientists knew that, to writing about space. I had a book come out last summer about the race to the moon in the 1960s, and it is relevant in the following way. Going to the moon was impossible when John Kennedy said on May 25th, 1961, let's go to the moon. It wasn't sort of figuratively impossible, it was impossible. We had none of the technology necessary to go to the moon. 9 years later, Armstrong and Aldrin are bouncing around on the moon. Every problem of climate change is a water problem. almost all the consequences of climate change are water related. And you know what? Just like the list I ticked off for you, we actually know how to tackle climate change. If you lined up 8 brilliant climatologists and public policy people and asked them separately for the top 10 things we could do to tackle climate change that would make a difference between now and 2030, the lists of 10 would converge. 5 or 6 of them on every list would be the same. It's not only not impossible, we know what to do. And so writing about how we got to the moon was such a break from the world we're sort of living in right this minute in order to get the book done for the anniversary last summer of the 50th landing. But it's also a reminder that we can actually tackle big problems and fix them. That's true of climate change in the big picture, and it's also true of the problems that San Miguel de Allende faces. There is no question those problems are fixable. But patient determination as well as urgency.
And we've got to go and do our part voting and get people who will listen to the scientists too and get the job done. Well, we will excuse you today, Charles. Thank you. We'll be talking about our time with you this morning for a very long time. It's been very memorable. Thank you very much. And
thank you guys. You've been great. I appreciate it.
We'll invite you to say goodbye, and we'll invite everyone else to stay connected for more general chat. And Charles, you're welcome to hang around too if you'd like. And we're always eager to welcome back Tom to share a perspective on what you've heard and any other goings on.
Just chime in another thank you to you, Charles. It was really a wonderful talk, and I love your positive message. And I always feel that those messages deliver a lot more of product than do the laments.
And I'm getting a message that Dylan Terrell of Caminos de Agua, who has spoken to our fellowship before, has been on the Zoom with us this morning. That is great. And I want to thank Dylan for all the time that you spent with Charles. And a special salute to Michael Hertz for bringing Charles's book and philosophy to the Sunday Service Committee, where we immediately said, well, I think it's a very long shot, but why don't you reach out to Charles and see if there's any way you could book him for a service. And a few months later, here we are, and that's part of getting people on the moon, too, is getting Charles Fishman here on a Sunday morning in little old San Miguel.